Welcome, everyone. I'm Brian Zaff, the founder and CEO of Flight Financial. Joining me today is Anthony Eden, the founder and CEO of DNSimple. Welcome, Anthony.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So I'd love if we could start off by just talking a bit about, what DNSimple does, how you built it, and what you like about leading it.
Sure. So we are a DNS provider and a domain registrar really focused on automation. So we provide a lot of API endpoints so that other companies and people that want to register and manage their DNS automatically can do so through the API.
Very cool. And what was your approach to bootstrapping? I guess when I was doing research, I realized that you kind of had it as a side hustle for a while, it looked like.
Yeah, that's correct. So I started it back in 2010. My brother and I started it together. And at that point, I was just leaving job and working on another job. And so basically, I managed to carve out some time, usually on nights and weekends, where I would start working on it. I also made sure to carve out as part of my contract with the company I was working with that was my intellectual property. And they were fine with that. We made clear boundaries. And so I worked on it for the first few years. And then once it started taking off, I turned it into my full-time gig. But I was actually the third person to be hired, my brother, and we hired another person before I even went full-time on it.
Wow. And that's great that you were able to start something with your brother too. Is he still involved with the business currently?
He is not. He left in 2014, and I ended up buying back his ownership shares and then continued on with the company since then.
I guess what was that like? What was going through your head when, something that you started with your brother, you kind of realized he wanted to go a different direction? Could you
It was
talk about that?
difficult. Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, it's really tough to start a business and to keep a business going with family. There's a lot of challenging differences. And as you pointed out, he was going one direction and I wanted to go a different direction. And so it took a while to deal with that. But it's something that had to be dealt with, and I did my best to deal with it over the years to get it out of the way and to make sure that the company operated well beyond his.
It sounds too like you've really focused on trying to systematize things so that everybody's got kind of a work-life balance and you're able to work effectively in a remote environment. Could you talk a bit more maybe about some of the frameworks that you use to do that?
Sure. So yes, that's true that it was part of something that I wanted from the very beginning. The idea was to create a sustainable business that I could be happy with and that I could employ people who would also be happy working there. So first of all, we are fully remote. We have been since day one. And what that means is that we need a lot of asynchronous process to keep things going. Over the years, we've tried lots of different things. GitHub still remains a core part of what we use to communicate asynchronously, especially when we're communicating decisions, so sort of permanent decisions. We also use Slack quite a bit in order to communicate just sort of regular chat. In terms of frameworks, the one that we've started using more recently, and this is mostly for product development, is the Shapeup framework. So we looked at Basecamp's Shapeup framework. We've tried lots of different things over the year, but this one actually has worked pretty well recently for us to start bringing out new features on a fairly consistent basis.
And for those who aren't familiar, could you just give a bit of an overview of what that framework entails?
Sure. So Shapeup basically breaks down the process of development into a shaping process. So that's where you kind of define the experience that the customer will have, but not in detail, really only just flows, right? So you're gonna basically fat marker the flow of the design. We use Miro boards, but you could use pretty much any. You're looking for some of the challenging areas, some of the rabbit holes that might occur. Then you go into a betting process, and that's where whoever the executive team is that's in charge of it will say, we're going to bet on this particular shape project. And then you go through a building phase. And I think one of the key parts is that the building phase and the shaping phase are all time constrained. So for example, we time constrain our shaping to a maximum of 6 weeks, and then our building to a maximum of 6 weeks plus a 2-week cool down. And so that way we can be shaping during one cycle while they're building something, by the team's building one or more things. And then during the next cycle, they'll start building the things we just shaped and we'll start shaping new things.
That seems like a very useful way to kind of keep things in scope and just make sure that what you're trying to actually realize kind of fits the time constraints and the resources you have available.
It does, as long as the team that's going to be implementing it is given the ownership of the scoping. So for example, they can look at a shaped project, then they can say, well, your appetite is 6 weeks on this, but frankly, this would take 12 to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to scope down some of the elements to a minimum viable product for that particular element. And then they're able to go in and actually implement it within that time frame. And the key is at the end of the 6 weeks, it's launched to production. Like it's out there. And so it has to be built incrementally during the 6 week period. Like I said, so far it's been working pretty well. We're about to start our 4th cycle using it, I think, in a couple of weeks. And when we do that, we're going to do a pretty challenging project. So we'll see if it continues working. But so far, I'm very happy with it.
Very cool. And I think you were on the Effective Founder podcast a couple years ago, and you'd mentioned then that you were using John Doerr's OKR framework.
Yes.
Are you still using that as well? And how did the two kind of align?
So we do still use that, and we use it generally when we have a major objective. So the OKRs are really designed for audacious goals. So when you want to do something big. Right now, we have one major objective that follows OKRs that we're doing. And in it, we have the key results. And basically what we do is we're tracking our key results all throughout the period where we're trying to execute this objective to ensure that we're staying within those boundaries. So I think OKRs are turning out for us to be more of a strategic sort of long-term objective that we're looking at. And then within that, we can break down into smaller projects, which we've always done. We just hadn't always used Shapeup to do that. So we do use OKRs. We don't try to fit everything into them, though.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And then I guess in the course of managing your projects, do you have kind of certain key performance indicators that you look at consistently, or does that vary depending on kind of what you're trying to achieve?
So, I mean, there's obvious ones, right? So for example, if we launch a new feature, we want to know what is the adoption of that feature. If we do something around our API, we want to know what the usage is around the API. And all of this ultimately ties back to, are we giving our customers what they need? Are we either increasing revenue through that or improving retention rates? So, I mean, we're a business, we're a for-profit business. And ultimately we have to tie this back with our ability to continue making a profit and continue growing at a steady rate, because that's how we've designed DNSimple to operate. It's really designed to be a steady, growing, sustainable business.
Which I think makes a lot of sense. And I think too, it kind of aligns with this trend that we've been seeing pretty much since COVID, and with the great resignation and great reshuffling of people trying to take a more balanced approach to growth and work-life balance. What are your thoughts on that trend?
I think that it's not that surprising that people are getting a little burned out from constantly pushing. There are folks out there in the world that are very comfortable with really pushing hard on a regular basis. And for them, that gives them energy. But that's only a small portion of the world. Not everybody wants to be working constantly. They have other things that are important to them, whether it's their family or other skills, whatever it might be. There are other reasons that people are motivated. And so I think it's important to create an environment where you can do both of those things, but within limitations, right? We make limitations. Sometimes we might push a little harder because we see an opportunity, but it can't be constant. That's one of the reasons why I've kind of always stayed away from venture capital funding, because their incentive is to get you to grow extremely quickly. Like that is the objective. And it's hard. It's really hard. There are some people that can do it repeatedly. I personally have never been one of those people. So I built the company around what I thought would give me the lifestyle I want. And it turns out that there are many other people in the world that are starting to see that. I mean, look, like I said, we've been remote first since day one. I said, this is good, the way that the future of work is going to be. And I've continued staying that way, even when there were times where it's like, oh, it's difficult, right? It's difficult. We have people spread across time zones, but with good processes and with a team that communicates and collaborates well, I think you can overcome those difficulties.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I guess kind of hand in hand with not taking, institutional capital, it sounds like you've been able to successfully build a business by bootstrapping it and then also sustain that. Could you talk a bit more maybe about what your approach to bootstrapping the business has been?
Yeah, so the first one, which is so obvious, and it's maybe more common now, but when I was starting DNSimple 12 years ago, it was a little less obvious. You have to charge from day one. There's no free rides. I mean, ultimately, you can use freemium methodologies to grow your customer base if done well, but you have to have a viable growing revenue stream, and potentially not just one, but multiple streams. So I think that's a key part of it. And I think there's a better understanding now, especially in technology businesses, that there has to be a reasonable revenue stream for the vast majority of businesses in order for them to succeed. The other part that I focused on was really solving customer pains. So DNSimple has remained extremely focused throughout our 12 years of business on DNS. And there have been opportunities to go other directions, but frankly, I said, look, let's stay focused. Let's make sure that we're giving our customers what they need and continue improving on that core value that we offer. And if you're going to build a long-term business, that's probably, at least it has been successful for us. It's been a good way to grow DNSimple, is to stay focused on solving customer problems, real customer problems today, and charging money for it. Again, it seems so obvious, but 12 years ago, a lot of people weren't thinking this way.
It is almost counterintuitive. It was more like the field of dreams approach, right? If you build it, they will come. And that's really not the case. I guess staying on this topic of kind of bootstrapping, did you have kind of any, financial modeling that you were doing to try to forecast out your cash flow? And what did that look like?
Yeah. So for the first 5 years or 6 years of DNSimple, I had spreadsheets where I would calculate every month's revenue, MRR, growth rates, things like that. And I would look at those and say, okay, how are we doing? Where are we going to be in terms of cash on hand? What does the cash flow look like? Things like that. And I was doing it myself very naively. Now I have much better accounting system with people that do that, prep that work for me. And I can go look inside of our accounting tools and I can say, well, let me do an analysis of the last 2 years. And then I can build a projection for the next couple of years. So yes, I used it. Do I think that it ultimately changed our strategies? Probably not. I think what it did is it gave me points where I had the confidence to hire. Because one of the things that I didn't do is I didn't overextend I held back on hiring and really focused on optimizing with the team we had, rather than trying to extend into a team that we couldn't support, because I didn't want to ever be in the position where I was going to have to let somebody go because we didn't have enough money to cover their pay. To me, that was just unacceptable. So didn't start hiring until we had plenty of cash flow coming in, had a clear sense that where the growth rates were going to be, and knew that we would still have reasonable room, even if we hired somebody, that if things started to slow down, we still had plenty of runway to keep paying for it.
That is definitely a counterintuitive approach. And I feel like a lot of businesses, especially when COVID hit, realized that they hadn't planned their strategy that way. Did you have to let anybody go over the course of COVID-19 just because the revenue or the cash flow? That's great.
Not at all. Not at all. Our business kept going fairly steady throughout, maybe even got a slight bump up, which makes a lot of sense because we're in a business where we provide core internet infrastructure. And a lot of people ended up having to very quickly move onto to doing things all the time on the internet. And so that resulted in a lot of new businesses being created to support that, whether it was around education or team collaboration or whatever it might be. So for us, we went through it fairly smoothly.
That's great to hear. And I guess too, I mean, maybe moving outside of the business specifically, but now that you've been running DNSimple for years now, do you have any advice or feedback that you'd offer to other entrepreneurs?
Well, let's see. In general, what I would say is that you're building a business. So you have to design the business to something that you're comfortable growing over a period of time. If you believe that you have something that can make a massive change in the world and you see a path where it's going to grow very rapidly and you're ready for the challenge, by all means, go and get external funding. If you can prove that $1 in can be turned to $10 going out, then by all means, that's a good thing to fund. But most businesses aren't that way, and instead focus on the core parts of the business. So that means building a good product that solves a real problem, charge money for that, and ensure that your value is aligned. The value that the customer is getting is aligned with what you're charging. And then finally, make sure that you have a team that you can count on and build that team in a steady fashion. And build it in a way where you delegate out the responsibilities when the time is right. There's nothing worse than not being willing to delegate and holding on to things for too long as a leader of a team. At some point, you have to be willing to give responsibility to your teammates.
And I feel like that is something that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with, is being able to give up parts of this business that they've been building, and they feel like times that maybe they're the only person who can do that particular task. What was your process to figure out when the appropriate time was to delegate? And how did you get that confidence with your team to do so?
I think there was a point where I realized, so when I hired the first person who was another engineer and I saw some of the things that he was doing, I said, well, he's just better at this than I am in many cases. I'm really good at putting something together quickly and getting it out the door, trying something new and hacking it together. But he was definitely thinking more, how am I going to take this and make it something that's reliable, that we can count on, that's going to grow over the years? And so it was because I had somebody that provided a different style of working than what I was used to, that I think helped start down that path. And then frankly, meeting people along the way that could do a better job at things like customer success, or a better job at accounting, or a better job at legal, whatever it might be. It's just meeting people and then saying, you have to admit, like, this person's just better than you are at it. Like, delegate that to them, but create a system that you're like, delegation is not just handing it over to somebody and saying, okay, it's all yours now. It's systematizing it. It's creating a system that you can share with that other person so that they have a safety net, because it's not really about stopping them from doing something bad. It's more about helping them from getting to a situation that they're uncomfortable with. So I'm a big fan of building safety nets, and the systems that we have over the years have not always done it, but ideally end up building a safety net for the team as a whole. It's not a restriction. It's there to help ensure that they aren't stressed.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense and aligns with what I've seen too. I feel like you get clients or customers or just people internally who think a project should take X amount of time, and it almost invariably ends up taking 3X amount of time. So if you can build that kind of lag, or the chance for things to not go according to plan into the process, I think you're a step ahead.
And again, I highly recommend, if you're doing it from a technology standpoint, that's one of the things that Shapeup has done really well, because we used to think, how long will it take us to build something? And it flips it on its head and says, we now have 6 weeks to build something, or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on what our appetite is. And if we don't get it built, then we have to go take a hard look and say, why didn't we get it built? Is it worth continuing for another 2 weeks or not? At what point are we going to stop it? But so far we haven't had that problem, because of the fact that we get to think in advance of how it's going to flow with customers. So sorry, I'm on that again, but I think it's been, for us, it's been an important improvement over the last 6 months or year since we started using it.
I think it's a great insight that not just SaaS companies, but a lot of other businesses could benefit from.
Yep. Time boxing things is very, very important. And it's something that we often don't do. We really should be thinking, this is what I'm willing to spend on it, not this is what it's going to take. Because like you said, inevitably, if you try to estimate, estimating is almost impossible. You might get it right some of the time, but it's much better to just cap it and then scope down and then build in little increments, whether that's a business or a product or whatever it might be.
I completely agree with that approach. Well, Anthony, I know we're running up closer to time here. I guess, were there any kind of final thoughts or kind of key takeaways you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I think the only thing that I would suggest is that building a business is a hard thing to do, but it has the potential to give you a lot of freedoms. And if you solve a problem for one group of people who really have that problem and they're willing to give you money for it, you have a business. Anything other than that, you don't yet have a business. But if you can get to that point, then you can create a stable business. But not everybody needs to feel the necessity to do it. That's the other thing. Entrepreneurship is not for everyone. For them, it might not be the best thing. They might want to do something in academia. They might want to do something that's out in the world because they just want to deal with physical things in the world. They don't have to deal with managing a business and people. That's totally fine. I think ultimately each of us has to find what motivates us to be happy and follow those motivations.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And if people want to reach out to you or learn more about DNSimple, what's the best way to do that?
So there's a lot of different places to find me. You can find me on LinkedIn as Anthony Eden. You can find me on Twitter you can also just contact me at DNSimple. I'm anthony.eden@dnsimple.com. Any one of those are good options to get a hold of me.
That sounds good. Well, Anthony, I really appreciate the time, and I wish you guys the best of luck.
Thank you, Brian. I hope you have an excellent day.
You too. Take care. That was such an interesting talk with Anthony. There were several insights that he shared, and here are some takeaways that I had from the discussion and ways that I believe Flight Financial could help. One thing Anthony spoke about in the context of the Shapeup framework is the importance of having good processes and also setting time constraints for what you're trying to accomplish. Flight Financial can help you here by having a monthly recurring process for financial reporting implemented. And this process includes setting clear goals and tracking your progress to those goals in a clear time frame. Another thing Anthony spoke about, I wanted to touch on, OKRs, which stands for objectives and key results. In this case, an objective would be your why for doing something. Something like, we want to have such a successful business that ourselves and our employees are free to take off almost whenever they want to. Once you've got your reason why, it's important to have key results that let you know that you're on track to hitting that objective. And these key results should be things that are quantifiable and measurable. I think in the context of that, it's important to have good key performance indicators, also known as KPIs, that can help you ensure that you're tracking to your key results on a regular basis. And as part of our process at Flight Financial, we'll work with you to try to understand your business and your goals. And from there, we can help you implement appropriate KPIs to help keep things on track. Another thing Anthony spoke about I wanted to mention is that you have to charge for your service. And this might seem pretty obvious, especially if you're a 7-figure SaaS business owner. You are charging for your service. But how do you know for sure that the price that you're charging is the right price based off of the needs of your business today and your goals for your business tomorrow? Flight Financial can help you here by implementing a monthly business review process that will help you look at various financial metrics for your business. And from there, you can determine what the appropriate pricing for your business should be. Another thing Anthony spoke about I wanted to mention is that he was using manual spreadsheets in order to calculate his growth rates, model his cash flow, and also take a look at his monthly recurring revenue. Now, this is certainly one way to do it, especially if you want to really get your hands around the numbers and make sure you understand what's going on. But the challenge is, especially if you're a busy business owner, you don't necessarily have time for this. And this is a very time-consuming process. It can be subject to errors. And the other thing too, it's only as good as the quality of the data that you have available. As they say, garbage in usually equates to garbage out. Well, Flight Financial can help you here on a number of fronts. On the bookkeeping side of things, we can help you ensure that you've got good, reliable financial data. And on the financial performance management side of things, we can help you by taking these manual tasks off of your plate, moving the process into the cloud, and also setting up a semi-automated process that's recurring each month to help you really dig in and review what's going on with your business's financials. The last thing Anthony spoke about, and probably the most important thing I wanted to highlight here, is the fact that every one of us has different things that motivate us. And it's important for us to figure out what motivates us to be happy and then to follow those motivations. If you're motivated by working a lot of hours to really grow your business, that's great. But I think it's also important to recognize that there's other people who are not motivated by that. For sure, they want to grow a business that's good, that they can be proud of, and that can support their lifestyle. But they're also working to live and not living to just work. They want to be able to spend time with their family and their friends and pursue personal hobbies and other things that contribute just to the richness of life. And Flight Financial can help you with this. We can take those essential but also time-consuming bookkeeping and financial management tasks off of your plate. And together, we can help you shape your business to try to get the lifestyle that you want. I hope that you enjoyed this interview. I'm having a great time conducting these interviews and getting to talk with a lot of interesting CEOs and entrepreneurs just like Anthony. I'm Brian Zaff, the founder and CEO of Flight Financial, and I'll see you next time.